Alright, we're going to start tearing into the bottom end of the cr125. Just want to show you how to remove the clutch basket. I have a video on how to change the clutch plates, so that'll show you how to get to this point. Just look for that video, and that'll get you to here anyway. Also, to get the motor out of the bike, that's in the first motor video. So if you're looking on how to remove the engine, you can find that in that first video. But to get the rest of this clutch basket out, right here you have a 27 millimeter nut. So you're going to need a 27 millimeter socket, obviously. And counterclockwise, I got it loose because I had it out already. So you're going to take that off. This is your locking washer. Somebody's been in this bottom end before. The tabs weren't even folded over. But normally your tabs, in fact it looks like one broke off, you'll have your tabs and they'll fold over, and that keeps that locked in place. So you might have to take a screwdriver and bend those tabs out. Then you can take this inner piece, that should pop right out. Then you'll have a washer in here. Make sure you don't lose that washer, and keep track of the order that everything came out. But that'll get that out of there, and then also keep an eye on the bearing. So that's it. It's pretty straightforward. The most important thing is keep track of the sequence everything came out, as far as the bearing and whatever washers on there, that kind of thing. Okay, our next step, we're going to remove the Kickstarter. You got a 12 millimeter head bolt here that needs to be removed. I got it loose already, but just take your socket, obviously, loosen that up, take this bolt off. You could have taken this Kickstarter off while it was still in the bike if you wanted to. I didn't, obviously, so we're doing that now, but it doesn't matter when you take it off. And this should slide right out. Next, we're going to take our hose off on this side. Again, you could have taken this off when it was in the bike, but 6 1/2 dozen the other. Next step, we're going to remove our water pump housing. These are 8 millimeter. You got 1, 2, 3, 4. Longest bolt, second longest. These two are the same. When you're removing the water pump outer cover, pay attention to the sequence of the bolts. The way I have it orientated right now, this top bolt is the longest, this one here is the second longest, and then these two are the same length. So what I did is I took a picture of it. I take a lot of pictures when I'm doing this kind of stuff, so that way you'll know that, or write it down, because you can mix them up. You'll know when you start to tighten it. If you got the wrong one in the wrong spot, it's going to bottom out. But you could end up messing up the threads, or worst case scenario, you can end up screwing up the female threads, and then you're in trouble. So definitely pay attention to that. Okay, next we're going to remove the right crankcase outer section. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 bolts there, and I don't think I missed any. And you also, at this point, you already have the 4 out that was holding the water pump cover on. They need to be off to remove this as well. They're 8 millimeter head. I happen to have one missing, which I'm going to investigate. I don't know if whoever was in here last just lost a bolt, or if it's stripped, but I'll check that. And also, I have one that's a different size head, but that's because somebody changed it out. But it's not forced in there, so the threads are fine. So remove all these, and then you want to take a rubber mallet and very carefully tap around this a little bit, and then this outer section should come right off. Next we're going to remove our Kickstarter spring and gear. This is disconnected already, but this end of the spring would have been in that hole right there. When you put it back together, you have to put tension on it, because if you don't do it correctly, it won't ratchet back when you're trying to kickstart it once you get it back together. So pay close attention to that before you take it off, so you know which way it goes back. And that's your spring on the bottom. Okay, next we're going to remove our kick guide. That's a 10mm headed bolt. That'll just come loose. And then you have your kick idler gear. Remove that. Pay attention to the orientation. I don't think it matters, but I would pay attention to that. And when you pull this off, be careful, because there's supposed to be a thrush washer on here, and I do not see one on mine. And I paid pretty close attention when I took it off, and so I'm thinking somebody had this off before. Well, I know somebody had this apart before because it's been rebuilt several times, but I don't see that thrush washer, so keep an eye on that or you'll be in my situation. So now I'm going to have to order one of those. Okay, next we're going to remove our governor gear. That's this guy here. And he should just pull right out. Okay, next we're going to remove our shift mechanism. We're going to start with these three 10mm headed bolts. That's the orientation of the spring. Before you can remove your shift shaft, just make sure you got the gear shift off. 8mm headed bolt. Go ahead and remove this bolt. Be careful, there's a spring underneath here, and there's also some spring tension on the drum. That's a 10mm. Pay close attention when you take this off to notice where the washers are and your spring orientation. Now we can remove this last gear. That's going to be a 14mm. When you go to remove the bolt out of here, I use an impact. It's counterclockwise. Make sure you either hang on to your crank or put something in there to keep it from moving the best you can. I stuck a screwdriver in there, but watch your fingers, and then pay attention to where your washers are when you remove this. Remove your spacer. Pay close attention. There's a washer down here. Sometimes it sticks to this side, sometimes it sticks to the other side. Now you can remove your shifting drum. 12mm. It may come out a little tough, so just be careful. Make sure that you're not going to snap it. But more than likely, from the factory, it had Loctite on it, so it may come out a little tough. Now we're going to remove our reed valve assembly. You got 4 8mm headed bolts, and keep track of where your cable tie goes. Okay, now we're going to remove the flywheel. You got to remove this nut. That's an 18 millimeter. This is the style puller I'm going to use. It's the jaw type. This only has 2 jaws on it. The ones with 3 are a little bit better. You get a little more even grab. But basically get it behind the flywheel on both sides, and then get it snug by hand, and then either use an impact or use a ratchet, and make sure you're centered there, and just go ahead and tighten it. Eventually that should pop off. Also behind that nut that we took off is a washer, so keep an eye on that. Don't lose that. Next we're going to remove our 2 Phillips head screws right there. I use a straight blade. The Phillips was kind of stripping out a little bit, so be careful. The flathead actually worked out better. That or a square-headed screwdriver should fit in the center, but I would stick with a flathead. And then you have 2 8mm head bolts that have to be removed. One on the left, one on the right. Now you can remove your clutch linkage. Okay, so we're getting close to being ready to split our cases, which we have to use a special tool for that. I'll show how to do that. But before we can do that, we got to remove all these bolts. They're all 8mm head. Okay, so we removed all our casing bolts now. There was 2 there, 1 there, 3 on the inside, 2 on the bottom, and 2 on the right. And that's with your tag showing this way as far as the orientation that I just used. I had 1 missing, but you should have a total of 10. Very important when you're taking these bolts out, make sure you keep track of where they came from. There's like 3 different lengths, so I bagged them all separately and labeled them according to left, right, middle, etc. But they're definitely at least 3 different lengths, so that's important when you go to put them back in later. Okay, we're getting ready to split the cases. Make sure you got all your bolts out, double and triple check, because if you have 1 bolt in there, it's going to mess you up and you can end up cracking the case. And as you're doing it, make sure you're going nice and slow and making sure that they're split evenly. This is a Tusk puller. Basically, you get 6 rods, but they're 2 different sizes. I think that's 8mm, and I'm pretty sure the smaller ones are 6mm. So thread them in. I'm doing this on the magneto side, the flywheel side. So you put your threaded rods in, have 1 nut like that on the bottom. That's going to lock it onto the case, and then have another one with the flat side facing up. Try to put it as evenly as you can. Then you're going to take this guy. Also, I recommend that you put on the thread on the nut. Just leave it off a couple turns, so when this thing's pushing down on this, it's not pushing down on the shaft, it's actually pushing down on the head of the nut. So just screw it on there about 3/4 of the way. On the inside of this, you can see it's just a flat bar that's going to push down on that. So you just lay that on there, get everything even. Once you get everything even, you get it centered properly, then you can go ahead and put on your 3 top nuts that are going to thread all the way down to lock it in place. You don't need to go crazy tightening it up, because once you start pushing down on this, it's going to tension it up. This is what it'll look like once you have it installed. You'll have your top nut locking it in place, your bottom nut locking it onto the casing, and then your other nut will be holding these two together. So like I said, you don't have to make it super tight, make it snug. Once you start putting pressure on this, it'll tighten right up. And make sure, I don't know if you're going to be able to see that, make sure you're centered on the nut in here. That top piece that you see there, that's the part of the separator where it meets. So just make sure that that's centered well. Okay, so at this point you're going to start tightening down the nut on top of the separator. That's a 17 millimeter, 11/16 will fit, but preferably a 17 millimeter. I started it already. As you can see, it's starting to split the case. It's important that you go around and make sure that it's lifting evenly, which this is. It might start off a little uneven, but it should catch up with itself. But keep checking it periodically. I recommend using a wrench until you at least get it started and you know that you didn't forget any bolts. Once you know you didn't forget any bolts and it's lifting off evenly, if you want to go to an impact after that. But even then, I would go easy on the impact and just do it a little bit at a time and keep checking it. Okay, so once your case splits, you'll know when it's completely free because it'll get real loose. Now we're going to remove this top piece. Do it very slowly and keep an eye on where your gears are and such, because we're going to want to keep them in order, obviously, so we don't forget later where they go. So yeah, just be real careful when you take that off. Sometimes the gears stick to one side. Be sure to remove your nut that you had on there for the removal purposes. Okay, so once you got your cases split and you have your gears out, basically this is what you're going to be left with. This bearing will be changing and this bearing will be changing. Those are the crank bearings. The kit that I ordered doesn't come with the rest of these bearings. The only kit that I've seen that comes with all these other bearings is the wrench rabbit kit. It's a little on the expensive side, but I know this bottom end was rebuilt not too long ago. Obviously I'm going to change the crank bearings here and here, just for the fact I know that they took a hard hit because the actual bearing there actually got whacked pretty good. So we're not taking any chances on that. We got it apart, we're changing them. I'd like to change all of them. Hopefully I won't regret it, but I inspected every one of these and there's no metal inside of them. They're all spinning freely. They're going to be lubed back up. So we shouldn't have an issue there, but just keep that in mind. If yours has never been rebuilt, or if you're not sure when the last time it was rebuilt, you may want to change them all. But that's the one gear setup. That's the other gear setup. You have your shift drum and then your shift forks. Basically that's everything that was on the inside. Basically the main thing you got to do is try to keep an eye on your gears as they're coming out to keep them in order. I'll be using the book, and you should be using the book if you're tackling this, to make sure that you actually in fact have them all in the right order. But anyhow, that's where I'm going to end this video for now. Basically that gets you to the point where the cases are split. The crank I actually got out using a plastic mallet. I didn't have to use the tool to get it out. I just hit it a couple times with the plastic mallet and popped right out. But you'll definitely need the installer tool once we put this back together. And that's going to be a second video, so look out for that. That's going to be the rebuilding video. This one was just basically for getting to this point.